Bullies mock bartender's accent. They got smashed with bottles. Stellan Kowalski wiped down the mahogany bar, his movements methodical despite nervous energy coursing through his lean frame. At 5'7" with wire-rimmed glasses and perpetually hunched shoulders, he looked like what Flanagan's sports bar regulars expected, a quiet immigrant trying to blend into the American dream without making waves. His thick Polish accent, unchanged after 8 years in Detroit, made every interaction potentially embarrassing when customers grew impatient. The evening crowd filtered in slowly, construction workers and factory employees washing away honest labor with cold beer and lion's talk. Stellan knew most by name and drink preference, building relationships through consistent service that kept neighborhood bars alive. Flanagan's was a working-class establishment where people forgot troubles, not created them. Walls displayed faded sports photos and newspaper clippings from Detroit's better days. A massive television dominated the space above the bar. Stellan had worked here 2 years since losing his factory job when the plant moved to Mexico. Owner Patrick Flanagan had taken a chance despite Stellan's limited English and bartending inexperience. The work paid rent on his studio apartment and allowed money sent to his mother in Krakow. What made the job enjoyable was Mackenzie O'Brien, the evening waitress with auburn hair and quick wit who handled rowdy customers with charm and backbone. She never seemed impatient with his accent, actually listening when he spoke. "Stellan, table 6 needs another round," Mackenzie called from across the bar, balancing a tray of empty glasses with practiced ease. "Right away," he replied, his accent turning the words into right away, which usually drew tolerant smiles from the regular customers who'd grown accustomed to his speech patterns. Tonight, tolerant smiles were absent. 3 men had claimed the corner booth an hour ago, drinking heavily while making loud comments about foreigners taking American jobs. The leader was Braden Mackenzie, hulking with close-cropped hair and tattooed forearms. His companions, Tanner Walsh and Jackson Reed, followed his lead. Stellan had served them quietly, accepting their mispronunciations and accent imitations with dignity. What they didn't know was that he'd spent 5 years training in Polish martial arts before emigrating, plus 3 years studying Brazilian jiu-jitsu in Hamtramck. More importantly, he'd grown up in Nowa Huta, where survival meant learning to fight young, but his mother's American dream meant promising to build a peaceful life. "Hey, Polak!" Braden's voice cut through the general conversation like a rusty blade. "Bring us another round of Budweisers and try not to spill them with those shaky immigrant hands." Stellan felt heat rise in his cheeks, but said nothing. He pulled 3 cold bottles from the cooler, arranged them on a tray, and walked carefully to their table. As he set down the beers, Tanner deliberately bumped his elbow, causing one bottle to tip and spill foam across the wooden surface. "Jesus Christ," Tanner laughed loudly. "Can't even carry a beer without making a mess. Maybe they should send you back to bartending school if they even have those in Poland." "Sorry," Stellan muttered, using his bar towel to clean up the spill while the 3 men laughed at his expense. Other customers glanced over but quickly returned to their own conversations, following the unwritten rule of minding your own business in establishments like this. The harassment continued for the next hour. Braden ordered drinks with complicated names, ridiculing Stellan's pronunciation. Jackson complained his beer was contaminated by foreign germs and demanded fresh bottles constantly. Tanner made exaggerated gestures, pretending fear that the clumsy immigrant might spill on his clothes. Together they created constant humiliation that made Stellan's hands shake and accent thicken under stress. Other customers avoided eye contact, uncomfortable but unwilling to get involved. Mackenzie noticed. During a brief lull, she approached Stellan at the bar. "You don't have to take that garbage," she said quietly, green eyes flashing with anger. Stellan shook his head, polishing spotless glasses. "Is better to ignore. They drink, they pay, they leave eventually." What he didn't tell her was that every instinct screamed to end this humiliation directly. His hands remembered precise angles to break bones, pressure points that could drop men in seconds. But his mother's voice was stronger. "You are better than the violence, Stellan." The pattern escalated over following weeks. Braden and his crew became regular fixtures, claiming the corner booth Tuesday and Friday nights during Stellan's shifts. They brought friends, expanding their audience for humiliating the dumb Polak bartender. They ordered complex cocktails to watch him struggle with English names. They complained about every drink, sending back good beers for imaginary flaws. They deliberately left messes, calling him over to clean while making foreign cleaning lady jokes. They targeted customers who showed Stellan kindness. When old Frank Morrison complimented Stellan's work ethic, Braden wondered if Frank was going soft on illegals. The message was clear. Supporting Stellan had social consequences. Other staff distanced themselves from practical necessity. Even Mackenzie limited conversations to work necessities. The isolation was worse than direct harassment. Stellan endured it all with the same quiet dignity his mother had taught him, cleaning glasses and serving drinks while swallowing his pride in increasingly bitter doses. Each night, he went home to his small apartment and practiced his English, determined to eliminate the accent that made him such an easy target. Each morning, he looked in the mirror and reminded himself that this job was temporary, that he was building towards something better, that violence would only destroy the future he was trying to create. But the breaking point came on a busy Friday night when the Lions were playing Green Bay, and the bar was packed with fans wearing blue and silver jerseys. Stellan was working alone because the other bartender had called in sick, struggling to keep up with the constant stream of orders, while Braden and his crew occupied their usual corner table like conquering generals, surveying their territory. Mackenzie was weaving between tables with practiced efficiency, taking orders and diffusing the kind of good-natured arguments that came with divisional rivalries and alcohol. She was wearing her Lions jersey, the same one she wore for every home game, and her smile was bright despite the chaos of the busy shift. That's when Braden decided to escalate beyond his usual routine of mocking Stellan's accent and ordering drinks he didn't want. As Mackenzie passed their table with a full tray, he deliberately stuck out his foot, sending her stumbling into the adjacent booth. Glasses crashed to the floor, beer soaked into upholstery, and Mackenzie hit her knee hard against the booth's edge. "Oops," Braden said with exaggerated innocence. "Sorry about that, sweetheart. Guess I'm just clumsy when I've been drinking American beer, served by real Americans instead of foreign substitutes." Mackenzie struggled to her feet, her knee already swelling and her jersey soaked with spilled beer. Other customers watched the scene unfold with the uncomfortable expressions of people who knew they were witnessing something wrong, but couldn't decide whether intervention was worth the potential consequences. "You did that on purpose," Mackenzie said, her voice tight with pain and anger. "Did what on purpose?" Braden asked with mock confusion. "I'm just sitting here enjoying my drink and watching the game. Maybe you should watch where you're going, instead of flirting with Polish boy over there." Tanner and Jackson laughed like this was the funniest thing they'd ever heard, and several other customers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The bar had gone quieter, conversation muted, as everyone waited to see how the situation would develop. From behind the bar, Stellan watched it all unfold with growing fury. His hands gripped the edge of the mahogany surface hard enough to turn his knuckles white, and for the first time in years, he felt the familiar heat of combat rage building in his chest. These men hadn't just humiliated him. Now they were hurting someone he cared about, someone who'd shown him kindness in a world that seemed determined to grind down anyone different. "Maybe clumsy waitress needs some lessons in balance," Braden continued, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet bar. "'Course if she's learning from Polish boy there, no wonder she can't stay on her feet. Foreign training, foreign results." Something shifted in Stellan's posture, subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew how to read body language. His shoulders squared slightly, his spine straightened, and when he moved from behind the bar, his usual shuffling gait was replaced by something more purposeful. "Mackenzie," he said, his accent still thick but his voice carrying new authority. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she said, but she was clearly favoring her injured knee. Braden stood up from the booth, swaying slightly but still formidable at 6 feet and 200 pounds of muscle built in prison weight rooms and bar fights. "Look at this," he announced to the bar. "Foreign boy thinks he's gonna do something. What you gonna do, Polak? Cry in your native language?" Stellan walked slowly toward their table, his movement drawing the attention of everyone in the bar. The television still showed the Lions game, but nobody was watching anymore. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to see what was happening. "You hurt her on purpose," Stellan said simply. "Prove it," Braden sneered. "Besides, what's it to you? She your girlfriend? You even know how to please an American woman, or do you need subtitles for that too?" The insult hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Tanner and Jackson flanked their leader, forming a semicircle that trapped Stellan between their table and the bar. Other customers began moving away, clearing space for whatever was about to happen. "I think maybe you boys should pay your tab and leave," Patrick Flanagan called from behind the bar, but his voice lacked conviction. He was outnumbered and outweighed, and everyone in the room knew it. "We'll leave when we're ready, old man," Braden replied without taking his eyes off Stellan. "Right now, we're having a cultural exchange with our Polish friend here." That's when he made his fatal mistake. Instead of accepting Stellan's quiet retreat, instead of being satisfied with the humiliation he'd already inflicted, Braden reached out and grabbed Stellan's glasses, crushing them in his hand before dropping the twisted metal and broken lenses onto the floor. "There," he said with satisfaction. "Now you look even more pathetic." The bar was completely silent now, except for the game commentary from the television. Mackenzie gasped from where she was sitting, holding ice to her swollen knee. Patrick reached for the phone behind the bar, probably thinking about calling the police. Stellan stood perfectly still for a moment, looking down at his destroyed glasses. Without them, his vision was blurred but not impaired enough to matter. More importantly, without them, his face looked different, harder, more angular, like a completely different person. When he looked up at Braden, his brown eyes held a coldness that made the bigger man take an involuntary step backward. "Bad mistake," Stellan said quietly. What happened next lasted 15 seconds, but felt like an eternity to everyone watching. Stellan moved like water flowing around obstacles, his body seeming to flow in directions that physics shouldn't have allowed. Braden threw a haymaker that would have knocked out most men, but Stellan wasn't there when the punch arrived. He'd slipped inside the arc of the swing, his right hand snapping out to strike Braden's floating rib with surgical precision. The big man doubled over, gasping, and Stellan grabbed the back of his head, driving his knee upward into Braden's solar plexus. The impact lifted Braden off his feet and sent him crashing backward into the booth, his breath exploding from his lungs in a sound that was half gasp, half scream. Tanner came at him from the right, swinging a beer bottle like a club. Stellan caught his wrist, twisted it at an angle that made bones pop, and used Tanner's own momentum to send him spinning into the adjacent table. Chairs scattered and glasses shattered as Tanner hit the floor hard, clutching his wrist and making sounds like a wounded animal. Jackson was smarter or more afraid. He grabbed an empty bottle from their table, broke it against the edge, and lunged forward with the jagged glass leading. Stellan sidestepped the thrust, grabbed Jackson's extended arm, and delivered a precise elbow strike to the nerve cluster in his shoulder. The bottle fell from suddenly nerveless fingers as Jackson's entire right arm went dead. In one fluid motion, Stellan swept Jackson's legs and guided his fall so that he landed hard on his back, all the air rushing from his lungs as his head bounced off the hardwood floor. The entire confrontation had taken less than 20 seconds. Three men who'd walked into the bar full of swagger and confidence were now groaning on the floor, struggling to breathe, clutching various injuries that would remind them of this night for weeks to come. Stellan stood over them, not even breathing hard, his destroyed glasses crunching under his feet as he surveyed the wreckage. The bar was absolutely silent, except for the Lions game still playing on the television and the labored breathing of the three defeated bullies. Braden was trying to sit up, his face pale with pain and shock. You can't just..." he wheezed. "Can't just what?" Stellan asked, his accent somehow less pronounced now, as if the violence had burned away the uncertainty that usually clouded his English. "Defend myself, protect friend, stop bullies from hurting innocent people." He knelt down beside Braden, close enough to be heard clearly, but not so close as to seem threatening. The big man flinched anyway, probably expecting another blow. "You think because I have accent, because I am quiet, because I clean glasses and serve drinks, that I'm weak," Stellan said, his voice carrying across the silent bar. "You think I am easy target, yes? Someone you can push around, humiliate, make feel small." Braden said nothing, just stared at this transformed version of the man he'd been tormenting for weeks. "But you know nothing about me," Stellan continued. "You know nothing about where I come from, what I learned growing up in place where weakness means death. You see immigrant bartender, but I see three spoiled Americans who never fight for anything real in their lives." He stood up, looking around the bar at the shocked faces of customers who'd watched him serve them drinks for 2 years without ever suspecting what lay beneath his quiet exterior. "I could hurt you much worse," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I could break bones, damage things that never heal properly, but I don't, because I choose to be better than that. I choose to be better than you." The moral weight of his words hung in the air like incense in a cathedral. Here was a man who'd been pushed to his breaking point, who'd defended himself with devastating effectiveness, but who'd chosen mercy when vengeance would have been easier. Tanner was trying to sit up, cradling his damaged wrist. Jackson remained flat on his back, staring at the ceiling and probably wondering if he had a concussion. Braden managed to get to his hands and knees, his breathing still labored from the rib shot. "This is how it works now," Stellan announced. "You three not welcome here anymore. You find different bar, different people to bother. You leave Flanagan's, you leave me alone, you definitely leave Mackenzie alone. And maybe you think about being better people, though I doubt you capable of such improvement." The threat was delivered without raised voice or obvious menace, but every person in the bar understood that crossing Stellan Kowalski would be a very serious mistake. Braden struggled to his feet, swaying and clutching his ribs. "This ain't over," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "Yes," Stellan replied calmly, "it is over, very much over." The three men limped toward the exit, supporting each other and avoiding eye contact with the rest of the customers. Braden paused at the door, turned back as if to say something defiant, but when he saw Stellan watching him with those cold brown eyes, he changed his mind and pushed through the door into the Detroit night. Silence stretched for another moment before conversation gradually resumed, quieter than before, charged with the electricity that follows unexpected violence. Stellan walked back behind the bar, his movements normal again, and began cleaning up the broken glass as if nothing unusual had happened. "Holy hell!" Patrick Flanagan said from beside the register. "Stellan, I had no idea you could... I mean, where did you learn to fight like that?" "Poland, different place than America," Stellan replied simply. "Sometimes you learn things you hope never to use." Mackenzie hobbled over to the bar, still favoring her injured knee, but moving under her own power. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for standing up for me. I know that's not easy for you." Stellan met her eyes, seeing something there that made his heart race, despite the adrenaline still coursing through his system. You helped me many times when customers impatient with accent. Is my turn to help you. Over the following weeks, the atmosphere at Flanagan's transformed completely. Word spread through the neighborhood about the quiet bartender who dismantled 3 tough guys without breaking a sweat. Construction workers who'd previously treated Stellan with polite indifference now sought him out for conversation. Factory workers asked his opinion about everything from sports to politics, genuinely interested in his perspective. The regular customers began defending him when newcomers made comments about his accent, turning what had once been a source of shame into something that commanded respect. "That's Stellan," they'd say. "He's good people. Shows you can't judge a book by its cover." Patrick started giving him more responsibilities, teaching him to handle the register and even manage inventory. "I've been running this place for 15 years, Patrick told him one quiet afternoon. "Never seen anybody earn respect the way you did. That's worth more than perfect English." Braden and his crew never returned to Flanagan's. Some said they'd started drinking at a chain restaurant across town, where their behavior went unnoticed among the corporate blandness. Others claimed Braden had actually apologized to Stellan through a mutual acquaintance, though Stellan never mentioned such a conversation if it happened. The real change came 6 weeks later, when Mackenzie asked Stellan to walk her home after a late shift. They'd been talking more since the confrontation, real conversations that went beyond work-related necessities. She'd started asking about his life in Poland, his family, his dreams for the future, and Stellan found himself opening up in ways he hadn't since arriving in America. "Can I ask you something?" Mackenzie said as they walked through the quiet streets of their neighborhood. "Of course," Stellan replied. "That night when you fought those guys, were you scared?" Stellan considered the question seriously. "Not scared of fighting, scared of what I might become if I let anger control me. In Poland, I see what violence does to good people, changes them, makes them hard inside where they should stay soft." "But you protected me," Mackenzie said. "You did what was right." "Yes," Stellan agreed. "Sometimes must choose between being peaceful and being good." That night, being good was more important. They'd reached her apartment building, a modest 3-story structure with flower boxes in the windows and the kind of security system that relied more on neighborhood solidarity than technology. Mackenzie turned to face him, standing close enough that he could smell her perfume mixed with the lingering scents of the bar. "I'm glad you chose to be good," she said softly, then kissed his cheek before disappearing through the building's front door. 6 months later, Stellan still worked at Flanagan's, but everything had changed. His accent remained as thick as ever, but it no longer marked him as a target. Instead, it had become part of his identity as the bartender who'd proven that quiet strength was more powerful than loud bullying. He'd started teaching basic self-defense classes at the community center, sharing his skills with other immigrants who faced similar challenges. The classes were always full, taught in a mixture of English and broken Spanish and Polish, united by the understanding that dignity was worth fighting for. One evening, while closing the bar alone, he saw Braden through the window, walking past on the opposite sidewalk. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Braden actually nodded, not in friendship, but in acknowledgement of a lesson learned the hard way. Stellan felt no satisfaction in the encounter, no need for further vindication. He'd done what was necessary to protect someone who mattered to him, had shown that strength came in many forms, and had chosen mercy when vengeance would have been easier. Later that night, Mackenzie met him after her shift, as had become their routine. They walked through the quiet streets hand in hand, talking about ordinary things. Her community college classes, his plans to bring his mother to America, the small dreams that made life worth living. "I love listening to you talk," she said suddenly. "Your accent, the way you choose your words so carefully, it's beautiful." Stellan smiled, squeezing her hand gently. It's funny how things change. What once made me target now makes me special to right person. Everything changed that night, Mackenzie agreed. You changed. The whole bar changed. Even some of the customers are nicer to each other now, like watching you stand up to those bullies reminded them how they should behave. As they reached her building, Stellan reflected on the strange path that had brought him to this moment. He was still a Polish immigrant bartender with a thick accent and wire-rimmed glasses. He still served drinks and cleaned tables and dealt with difficult customers. But now he did it all with the quiet confidence of someone who'd proven, to himself most of all, that strength came not from avoiding conflict, but from choosing your battles wisely and fighting them with honor. The lesson wasn't that violence solved problems, but that sometimes good people had to be willing to fight in order to remain good. Sometimes the choice wasn't between peace and conflict, but between justice and cowardice. And sometimes the quietest voice in the room belonged to the person with the most power to change everything. Stellan Kowalski had found his balance between the warrior he'd once been and the peaceful man he'd chosen to become. Some things were worth defending, and some people deserved protection, even if the protecting required remembering skills he'd hoped never to use again in his new American life.